Congratulate the team and especially State Kids India and Periyar Maniammai University on behalf of Asia Pacific for creating a benchmark in all women team launch a balloon satellite with an enter to Asia Pacific. Congratulations.
ஆசியாவிலேயே மாணவிகள் தயாரித்த முதல் செயற்கைக்கோளான மணியம்மையார் சாட் வெற்றிகரமாக விண்வெளிக்கு அனுப்பப்பட்டது.
வல்லம் அருகே உள்ள பெரியார் மணியம்மை பல்கலைக்கழகத்தின் பொறியியல் துறையில் படிக்கும் 15 மாணவிகள் இணைந்து மணியம்மையார் சாட் என்ற செயற்கைக்கோளை தயாரித்துள்ளனர். இது பெரியார் மணியம்மை பல்கலைக்கழக மைதானத்தில் இருந்து விண்ணில் செலுத்தப்பட்டது.
மணியம்மையாரின் நூற்றாண்டு விழாவில் பெருமை சேர்க்கும் வகையில் மணியம்மையார் சாட் என்ற பெயர் சூட்டியுள்ளனர். இந்த செயற்கைக்கோள் வளிமண்டலத்தின் வெப்பநிலை, ஈரப்பதம் குறித்து ஆய்வு செய்ய உள்ளது.
சிறப்பு விருந்தினராக இஸ்ரோ முன்னாள் திட்ட இயக்குனர் மயில்சாமி அண்ணாதுரை பங்கேற்றார். ஹீலியம் வாயு நிரப்பப்பட்ட பலூன் வான்வெளிக்கு 70,000 அடி வரை சென்று அங்குள்ள வெப்பநிலை மாற்றம் காரணமாக பாராசூட் உதவியுடன் 40 கிலோமீட்டர் சுற்றுவட்டாரத்தில் தரையிறங்கும் வகையில் வடிவமைக்கப்பட்டுள்ளது.
காலேஜ்லேருந்து பேசுகிறோம். நாங்கள் பெண்கள் எல்லாரும் சேர்ந்து இன்னைக்கு பலூன் சேட்டலைட் லான்ச் பண்ணியிருக்கோம். அந்த பலூன் சேட்டலைட்டில் ஒரு டீமாக இருக்கிறதுக்கு நான் ரொம்ப பெருமைப்படுறேன். அந்த பலூன் சேட்டலைட்டில் வந்து ஹீலியம் பலூன் ஃபில் பண்ணி நாங்கள் மேல் அமைச்சிருக்கோம். அது கீழே பாராஷூட் இருக்குது, அதுக்குள்ளே பேலோட் இருக்குது. பேலூரில் வந்து நாங்கள் படிப்பு சம்பந்தமான சில விஷயங்கள்லாம் வச்சுருக்கோம்.
தஞ்சையில் ஆசியாவிலேயே முதன்முறையாக முற்றிலும் மாணவிகளை தயாரித்த ஸ்கை NSLV 9 செயற்கைக்கோள் விண்ணில் செலுத்தப்பட்டுள்ளது. தஞ்சாவூரில் உள்ள தனியார் கல்லூரியில் பல்வேறு பொறியியல் பிரிவுகளை சேர்ந்த 15 மாணவியர்கள் சேர்ந்து ஸ்கை NSLV 9 மணியம்மையார் சாட் என்ற செயற்கைக்கோளை தயாரித்துள்ளனர். இவர்கள் 15 பேரும் சென்னை ஸ்பேஸ் கிட்ஸ் இந்தியா நிறுவனத்தில் பயிற்சி பெற்றுள்ளனர். இந்த செயற்கைக்கோள் இஸ்ரோ மைய முன்னாள் திட்ட இயக்குனர் டாக்டர் மயில்சாமி அண்ணாதுரை முன்னிலையிலும் பொதுமக்கள் முன்னிலையிலும் விண்ணில் செலுத்தப்பட்டது. இந்த செயற்கைக்கோளானது ஹீலியம் வாயு நிரப்பப்பட்ட பலூனுடன் 70,000 அடி வரை விண்வெளிக்கு சென்று அங்குள்ள வெப்பநிலை காரணமாக உருமாற்றம் பெற்று பாராசூட் உதவியுடன் 40 கிலோமீட்டர் சுற்று வட்டத்திற்குள் கீழே தரையிறங்கும். இந்த செயற்கைக்கோள் மேலே செல்லும் போதும் கீழே இறங்கும் போதும் அதில் உள்ள கேமரா உதவியுடன் வான்வெளியில் உள்ள வெப்பநிலை, காற்றின் ஈரப்பதம், வாயுக்களின் தன்மை ஆகியவற்றை கண்டறியப்படும் என்று மாணவிகள் தெரிவித்துள்ளனர்.
இப்போ பலூன் சேட்டலைட் வந்து லான்ச் பண்ணியிருக்கோம். இது வந்து ஸ்ட்ராட்டோஸ்பியர் வரைக்கும் போய் திருப்பி வந்து கீழே வரும். இதில் சென்சார்ஸ் வச்சு அனுப்பியிருக்கோம். இதை வந்து NSLVன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க, நியர் ஸ்பேஸ் லான்ச் வெஹிக்கிள். அதாவது ஸ்பேஸை போய் தொட்டுட்டு வர்றதால இது நியர் ஸ்பேஸ் லான்ச் வெஹிக்கிள் சொல்லுவாங்க. சென்சார்ஸ் வச்சு அனுப்பியிருக்கோம். 4 சென்சார்ஸ், டெம்பரேச்சர் சென்சார் 1, கேஸ் சென்சார் 2, ஆக்சிலரோமீட்டர் வச்சு அனுப்பியிருக்கோம். இது வந்து மேலே போகிறப்பவே எல்லாத்தையும் ரெக்கார்ட் பண்ணும். மேலே போகிற பலூன் ஸ்ட்ராட்டோஸ்பியரை இது பண்ணோடனே டச் பண்ணோடனே வந்து லோ ப்ரெஷரால் வெடிஞ்சு கீழே வந்துடும். ஸோ அந்த வெடிஞ்சு கீழே வந்து ஒரு இடத்துல விழும். அதை வந்து நாங்கள் முன்னாடியே ப்ரிடிக்ட் பண்ணி வச்சுருப்போம் சாஃப்ட்வேர் மூலமாக. அங்கே போய் நாங்கள் எடுத்து டேட்டாலாம் ட்ரை பண்ணிப்போம்.
Not audible.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Hello. Okay, you
Good
can hear me
evening,
now.
Professor.
Yeah.
Good
evening,
Professor
yeah.
Prabhat. Good evening.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
You are in Delhi, sir?
Well, I'm living on the outskirts of Delhi in a place called Gurgaon.
Okay.
Sir, audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Selvakumar. Dr. Selvakumar,
Okay, sir.
am I audible?
Madam, Dean Academic, madam.
It's audible, Professor. Yes.
Am I visible?
Yes, sir, it's audible.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
sir, audible, sir.
And visible also.
Okay, start panalama, sir.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Warm welcome to everyone. Needless to give introduction to such a renowned social scientist, economist, intellect, and with deep social commitment, Professor Prabhat Patnaik. His passion to introduce all major tradition in economics to the students and his ability to relate to the challenges that current society encounter is extraordinary. Emeritus Professor Prabhat Patnaik, Center for Economic Studies and Planning, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I am proud to welcome you, sir. Without further delay, I request our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Periyar Maniammai Institute of Science and Technology, to introduce the chief guest. Please, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Selvakumar. Thank you very much. Beloved Professor Prabhat, Patnaik, distinguished participants, friends, dear students, very good evening. I'm extremely happy that Political Science Department of PMIST is coordinating this webinar this evening. Friends, the word Periyar, Thandai Periyar, is synonym with rationality and equality. They are the core elements of his philosophy. The crux and essence of his philosophy is equality and rationality. Thandai Periyar propagated very strongly that women's education is the key for the social revolution. It was in this context, way back in 1988, Periyar Maniammai College of Technology for Women was founded. It was established at Vallam, Thanjavur. This was the first college in Asia, perhaps in the world, offering courses in engineering and technology exclusively for women. The college was rated one of the top 10 colleges that time in Tamil Nadu, producing hundreds of women engineers, engineering graduates. Several alumni of this college are today occupying preeminent positions in both private and government sectors. Today we have several alumni chapters in many countries like US, UK, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. Interestingly, the alumni are in close contact with their alma mater, providing excellent mentoring support to the students' study. Recognizing the human services the college rendered to the society at large, the state-of-arts infrastructure available, the conducive and very congenial atmosphere the campus provides, the dedicated and competent team of faculty, the Ministry of HRD, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India elevated the status of this college to a university deemed to be university in 2007. Periyar Maniammai Institute of Science and Technology deemed to be university thus came into being in the year 2007 and has become a co-education institution offering architecture and engineering courses of all disciplines in UG, PG, and PhD levels. Similarly, the university offers UG, PG, and PhD courses in arts, science, management, and education disciplines. I'm really excited to say that the former president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, visited this university, this institution 6 times while he was in office and even after he demitted his office. He was excited with the university's initiatives, its connectivity with the society through Periyar Pura scheme, providing urban amenities to rural areas. Dr. Kalam, in his world famous book, dedicated several pages to describe the initiatives of this university, and he remarked, it is a national model. Friends, I do not want to take much of your time. I know you are waiting for the eminent speaker's address. The university has received several accolades, the recent one being an award from ASSOCHAM, Association of Commerce and Industry of India, a trade body. It gave away an award, the Best Private University in Developing Entrepreneurs Award, to Periyar Maniammai Institute of Science and Technology recently. To this university to hold
Sir, sir, going, sir. You're audible, sir.
No.
Not audible.
Sir,
Thank you, sir.
போன்ல சொல்லுங்க சார்.
Sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I now welcome Professor Prabhat Patnaik. Please, sir.
Shall I begin?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Honorable Head of the Political Science Department, members of the faculty and students. It's a pleasure for me that I have been given this opportunity to speak to you. Basically about the new economic policy, new education policy. You see, 1930, when Gandhiji was launching his civil disobedience movement, he actually asked students to leave their colleges and universities and to join the movement. Now, at that point, Rabindranath Tagore, the poet, wrote to him saying, how can you ask people to give up their education? Because after all, there are so few educated people in the country. And if those who are getting education are asked to give it up, in that case, the country would be ill-served. It's better for the country that these people should continue in the places where they are getting some education. Which Gandhiji's reply was that, look, the education that they are getting is not the education that the country needs. In other words, Gandhiji was making a very important distinction between education and education. The fact that education is not a homogeneous thing to which you can give to somebody, or which you may withhold from somebody, that education as a homogeneous entity, a homogeneous quantity to which more or less is given to somebody. This is what Gandhiji was actually challenging. The idea, in other words, is that there is no such homogeneous thing called education, that education is something which depends upon, or what is relevant education, what is useful education, is something which is not independent of the context where this education is being given. Now, I think that's very important, because his idea was that the Indian nation in the making, that basically you have education that is required for the making of this nation, for nation building. Now, that education is quite different from the education that people get
Hello.
for getting their
Hello.
jobs. Yes, yes. Okay, so therefore, the idea was that education required for the purpose of nation building is not exactly the same as education that is required, let us say, for you're getting a job. They are not identical entities. Now, this idea of a non-homogeneousness of education, education that is relevant depending on the context that we are talking about, is something which is diametrically opposed to the idea of education under capitalism. In capitalism, you have for the first time the formation of a labor market. That means you may be here today, you may be hundreds of miles away somewhere else, you may be a skilled labor, you may be an unskilled laborer, whatever, you move around a lot. Capitalism is based on labor mobility. Labor mobility implies the coming into being of a labor market. And if this labor market is to be meaningful, then everybody who's moving around, people who are separated by hundreds of miles, must actually have the same kinds of knowledge, same kinds of skills, same kinds of attitudes. Therefore, capitalism requires education that is homogeneous. It's very important that what is being taught here and what is being taught 500 miles away, 2,000 miles away, or even 6,000 miles away must be identical, in which case a person from here can go tomorrow to the United States and fit into a job there. So the formation of a labor market requires a kind of homogeneity as far as education is concerned. So homogeneity becomes important with the coming into being of capitalism. The point, therefore, I'm trying to make is that the education which is required for nation building and the education that is given or demanded by capitalism are not identical things. Now, in India, in the post-independence period, we have always, no matter what our problems were, no matter what the problems with the education system were, we were always committed to a vision of education for nation building, which showed itself in a number of ways. First, it showed itself in the commitment to the idea of universal education, at least up to a certain level. When, for instance, the Right to Education Act was passed, that Right to Education Act provided that everybody must have the right to education between the ages of 6 and 14. That means that you had universal, and to the government's job to ensure that everybody in that age was actually in a school. Therefore, universalizing education was a part of the requirement of education for nation. The second was, of course, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to the syllabus. Imagine, for instance, an Indian student who's studying, let's say, economics, which is my subject. Such an Indian student must have some idea of Indian history. How can you understand the Indian economy today unless you know something about the Indian economy in the colonial period, unless you have some idea of the impact of colonialism on the Indian economy. But on the other hand, a person who is studying economics in Harvard or in Cambridge or in Oxford has no idea of colonialism, doesn't have to study colonialism. Therefore, the kind of syllabus which has to be taught here has to be quite different from the kind of syllabus which prevails in foreign universities. Mind you, this is true not only of social sciences. The great British scientist J.D. Bernal was of the view that the kind of science which should be taught in a country like India should not be the same as the science that is taught in a country like Britain or the United States, because the scientific requirements of the Indian society are not identical with the scientific requirements of those societies. Therefore, there has to be a difference in syllabus. Likewise, there has to be inclusiveness, that you have to have everybody, no matter what their economic status, who is covered by education, which is already implicit in the idea of a universal education. But that fundamentally, for instance, a Dalit boy, a person from a tribal background, a person from the OBC background, a person who is economically deprived should not be deprived of education for that particular reason. Because of which we had a number of things. We had, for instance, affirmative action in the form of reservations for specific categories of castes and so on. So we had an inclusiveness which was a part of the vision of education for building a nation. Likewise, for instance, the idea that persons who are getting educated must have an idea of the constitution. Education must impart a commitment to the values on which modern India is based, which are the constitutional values, and an egalitarian society, a society which is secular, a society in which everybody has a set of fundamental rights. Now, all these things must be told to every student, and the student must develop a kind of commitment to the society and the values upon which that society is founded. Additionally, of course, there's the whole question of education providing in your mind a stimulus to question. Now, that is very important, that education must make you question things, not accept things uncritically, but to actually question, to develop a scientific temper, and so on. Now, these are the hallmarks of an education system which is required for nation building. Sensitivity to others, a commitment to equality, and overcoming of caste and communal divide, and so on. All these are essential for building a nation, since education is a means through which the nation is built. It is important that education must impart these values. But on the other hand, what we find in the current new education policy is that for the first time, earlier education policies, even though they may be saying various things, it is true that actually the quality of education given was no good. It is true that our vision behind the education policy was always violated by the empirical reality of the education system, and so on. All that is true. But nonetheless, there was a commitment to education as a nation building activity. There was a commitment of education in the sense of being inclusive, and in the sense of being egalitarian, in the sense of not excluding anybody, and inculcating in the students commitment to the values of the Constitution. What we find in the current education policy for the first time is a moving away from the concept of education as a nation building exercise. as a nation building activity, but in fact, specifically looking at education as an activity for the promotion of capitalism. Now, why do I say that? I say that because look at a number of things. First point is that it actually explicitly provides for exclusion. Throughout the document, there is some talk about economically and socially deprived groups, but there is no explicit commitment to caste-based reservations in universities and colleges. There is no mention of it. Okay. Now, I think given the fact that even in a university like the JNU, caste-based reservation criteria have been violated and flouted, and JNU is directly under the nose of the central government, the fact that the government's commitment to such reservations has got diluted is without a doubt, and the fact that the education policy document doesn't even mention it is a point of some significance. Not only is it the case that, therefore, people would be excluded who come from socially and economically deprived backgrounds because there would be no reservation, but what is more, you would actually find that because education is all set to become more expensive, many people would simply economically be cut out of it. Why do I say that? Because even though the document talks about 6% of GDP being spent on education and so on, that government expenditure devoted to education must rise from 10% to 20%, there is no specific suggestions about how this is going to be actually achieved. In the absence of any specific suggestions of that kind, simply repeating this really does not make much sense. On the other hand, there is talk about, for instance, giving autonomy to colleges and universities, and what is more, financial autonomy as well. Now, autonomous colleges and so on, which are actually therefore have to more or less fend for themselves, would be charging much higher fees. And when they do that, then of course, these exclude large numbers of relatively poor students from socially and economically deprived backgrounds. Therefore, even in terms of the education system that is visualized, there is going to be an exclusion. Thirdly, you actually find that there are large numbers of exit points. That, for instance, you look at university education, after 1 year you can quit. After 2 years you can quit. You get a certificate and you quit. You have a 4-year undergraduate program in colleges, and out of those 4 years, you can quit after first year, you can quit after second year and get a piece of paper. Now it is not a 1-year program that is being offered. It is not a 2-year program that is being offered. It's a 4-year program, and you're simply going to drop out at some point, if you so wish. Therefore, this provides the possibility of people simply dropping out, and when they drop out, they're given a piece of paper, and that piece of paper we call a certificate or we call a diploma and so on. So effectively, therefore, the idea is to visualize a set of people who will be barely educated, who would just have visited a college or a university, but not people who are actually being trained or who are being given a proper course of education. Now, these exit points are basically, somebody may not have joined the university, but somebody joins the university, but then leaves after a year with a piece of paper. So these are, if you like, in the name of flexibility, providing a camouflage, providing a kind of cover for just people dropping out. The fourth is something which you find in the emphasis that is given to vocational studies. There's a lot of talk about vocational studies. Now, of course, it is true that not everybody who receives education should go on to do a PhD or something and become a professor in a university. But on the other hand, everybody must have a minimum level of education. There is a fundamental difference between education and the imparting of skills. Now, when you talk about vocational education, that is actually the imparting of skills that we are talking about. Therefore, a lot of people would now be siphoned off who do not get a proper education but are simply given skills. So effectively, therefore, this is providing for a dropping out from the education system. If you have a democracy in which citizens have a whole lot of responsibilities and rights, then every such citizen must be well informed about the world, because after all, these are people who are going to effectively make decisions about the world. In fact, one of the fundamental assumptions of democracy is that the ordinary man can think about foreign policy of the country and therefore can vote a particular political formation by understanding the issues that include foreign policy. Now, therefore, the presumption behind a democratic society is that everybody must have a minimum level of education to be able to make sense of the political issues that face a particular society. But on the other hand, if you siphon off people for vocational studies very early on, then effectively you are not creating citizens who are fit enough to be part of a democracy. Now, these are various ways in which fundamentally this education policy, while it talks about many things, is actually creating a camouflage, creating a cover behind which people would actually be dropping out, or people are being encouraged to drop out. Some people would continue, others would not. And as I said, since there is a fundamental distinction between education and the formation of skills, this document emphasizes that a large number of people, instead of getting education, should actually be shifted to the skill learning network, the skill formation network. Another point, which again is in the same direction, is that, now we are told that after class 3, after class 8, you are going to have board exams at which students would be sitting. This was never the case earlier. And the idea is that if somebody is not very good, then the person can be encouraged to what is called open learning. Now, this open learning is something which really is, again, a camouflage for non-learning. In Delhi, a very common practice among schools, including government schools, is that students who are not doing too well in these exams are basically sent off to the open learning stream, so that the school can then select a few good students who then go on to pass the board exams, and the school would then claim that, look, what a success rate we have had. Therefore, to generate a high success rate, you're weeding out people from the school system to the open learning system, and the open learning system is really not a serious system of education. Therefore, these are very many different ways in which people are now going to be shifted from the stream of education to the stream, all kinds of other streams like open learning, skill, vocational studies, and so on and so forth. And therefore, this goes against the fundamental idea of inclusiveness, which is essential in an education system for nation building. Now, why do I call it capitalist? Because you see, capitalism, while it insists on providing a homogeneous education, does not insist on providing an inclusive education. But in capitalism, you're familiar with Dickensian England, in which the children were actually doing huge amounts of labor in all kinds of workshops, in sweatshops, but they were not in schools. Capitalism believes in providing education only to that segment of the population whose services it requires. It does not believe in universal education. And therefore, the services of those who are outside of the education system, which is not required for capitalism, are now fundamentally, they are being given a kind of veneer of skills. And you see, skills or vocational education are the following advantage in a society like ours, namely that you have, that let us say there are 100 jobs. 100 people can be employed. But of course, if there are 200 people in the workforce, then the remaining 100 do odd jobs. Suppose the workforce size increases from 200 to 300, then those odd jobs are distributed not among 100 anymore, but among 200. And therefore, the reserve army of labor, what Karl Marx had called the reserve army of labor, that means the number of people who are not really properly employed, the unemployed, underemployed, partially employed, and so on. That is a number whose increase can get camouflaged, can be hidden by the fact that suppose earlier everybody had got 4 days of work during a week. Now, if their size doubles, everybody gets 2 days of work per week. In other words, job rationing can really mean that a large number of people can be given little bits of skills and simply they share out the jobs that are available. And effectively, therefore, this encouragement of training in certain skills is something which can always be passed off as, look, this is very useful, they're all getting jobs. But effectively, they are what economists call unemployed in disguise. In other words, a given number of jobs then simply get parceled out, divided up among more people, not that more jobs are created. This has been happening in the Indian economy, and the current education policy is basically going to prepare for this, and in the process, it is camouflaging the fact that there is going to be an increase in unemployment under it. Likewise, when you look at foreign universities coming here, when you say foreign universities come here, that we are now going to allow foreign universities here. I mentioned the example that an Indian student of economics would actually be, let us say, having to know, he must know something on Dadabhai Nauroji, must know something on Periyar. But on the other hand, in Harvard, they haven't heard of Dadabhai Nauroji. In Cambridge, they don't teach Periyar. And therefore, whenever you are having foreign universities coming, that is detaching what is taught, detaching the syllabus from the Indian realities and making it homogeneous with whatever is taught elsewhere. Now, these are all symptoms of the capitalist turn to our education system, which for the first time is being given an official imprimatur. In other words, this is something which had never officially happened, but now it is officially happening. Of course, it is not only the capitalist turn that is being given to the education system. Simultaneously, there is a Hindutva turn that is being given to the education system. Now, let me try and elaborate. Hello. So, for instance, every student is supposed to be proud of being an Indian. Now, it actually says that pride in being Indian. Now, what does pride in being Indian what does it mean? If we say that every student must be proud of being an Indian, there are many things wrong with the Indian society, which is what Periyar, for instance, pointed out. If you want to change that society, then you must feel angry about the things which are wrong with that society. A society which has got millennia of inhuman practices like untouchability. Now, obviously, that is not something to be proud of. That is something that we should actually be ashamed about. Therefore, when you say that it must inculcate in students a pride of being Indian, that basically means now you're going to suppress phenomena like the caste system, phenomena like untouchability and so on. You're going to present the history of Indian society in a prettified form, in a form where it appears very nice and beautiful and so on, but on the other hand, you are going to therefore gloss over all the unpleasantnesses about the Indian society. And therefore, caste system would have to recede to the background. Likewise, for instance, there is a lot of talk about fundamental duties. Now, what does fundamental duties mean? A person must have has fundamental rights. Now, students must know what their fundamental rights are. And therefore, if you're going to emphasize fundamental duties, but not tell them about the fundamental rights, effectively then what you are doing is that you are producing conformism. You're producing a set of students who are being taught to be conformist. Now that is the idea precisely of what an education in modern India should not be. If you are, for instance, if the purpose of education is to build a nation, and building a nation means changing the society we have in a direction which is already indicated in our constitution, then you must be dissatisfied with what we have. If you are satisfied with what exists, then you would never build anything. So the idea behind building a modern India, building a modern Indian nation, is to be angry about injustice, angry about inequality. On the other hand, if you teach students to be conformist, in that case, you are actually destroying that anger. Effectively, therefore, the whole purpose of this education system is to actually produce cannon fodder for capital. That people who would, the better off, the more educated people would then become cannon fodder for capital in the sense of being conformist executives in the capitalist enterprises. And as far as the others are concerned, they would in fact become conformist laborers or a part of the reserve army where a given number of jobs is parceled out among more and more people. For instance, again, you look at this whole concept about Nishkama Karma. Now, Nishkama Karma can be okay as a personal philosophy, but if Nishkama Karma is taught to everybody as a kind of social outlook to be encouraged, then that is a way of actually condoning exploitation. If a worker is supposed to be having nishkama karma, then that worker is not going to be demanding higher wages, because then you say, look, you are being selfish, you are violating nishkama karma, because if you did not, if you believed in that, you shouldn't be demanding higher wages. Therefore, it's a way of producing conformism in an oppressive, exploitative society. And therefore, the way I see this education system, that that essentially it is exclusionary, it is homogeneous. It's basically therefore taking Indian education from the Indian context and basically teaching what is taught in Harvard or Cambridge or something to the Indian students, where they don't learn about their own history. And it is also, as I said, introducing conformism. Now, to say this is not to say that students, for instance, should not get jobs. Of course, they should. Students should not, get employed in capitalist enterprises. We have a capitalist system, and of course, to the extent that the products of the education system have to survive, then they go out into the economy. They have to earn their living. Therefore, they have to join a capitalist system. But the point is, there's a difference between students of an education system, whose goal is nation building, joining a capitalist enterprise, and students being specifically trained only for the capitalist enterprise. There's a difference between the two. When you say students are specifically trained only for the capitalist enterprise, then effectively what you are saying is that the nation building task of education should be given a go by, should be given a farewell to. Now, I think that is something which is an extremely dangerous phenomenon. It is dangerous because of the fact that if you have that kind of an exclusion, if you have a perpetuation of dualism in our system, where some people belonging to better off segments, some people belonging to upper castes and upper classes get an education and become executives in capitalist factories. Other people don't get an education, get trained in certain kinds of skills, and of course are jostling against one another for a given number of jobs. Then you are producing a dualism. Now, I believe that this dualism permeates this new education policy through and through. It is there in when you are talking about, I mean, it's there in people getting diploma and certificates and dropping out of the 4-year course. It is there in vocational training versus proper education. In fact, half the people are supposed to be going in for vocation. If you take schools and colleges together, half the people who are in schools and colleges would be going to, would be dropping out, would be taking the skill route. Now, this therefore is perpetuating officially a kind of dualism. As I said earlier, the Constitution provided equality for all. And of course, that meant that at least up to a certain level, there has to be a complete equality, a complete opening of opportunities for everybody. Those who cannot, the whole system of reservations was actually meant for that. But on the other hand, if you allow duality to creep into this officially in the new education policy, then you are actually going against the constitutional provisions. And that being the case, I would suggest that this education policy is something which has to be critiqued solidly, because it is against the constitutional provision of equality of opportunity for everybody. Now, of course, it says many things, as I said. For instance, it says that 6% of the GDP should be spent on education, makes no provision for 6% of GDP being spent on education. As a matter of fact, the moment this issue is raised, people ask the question, where would the resources come from for spending so much on education? Resources are there. The reason why they are not mobilized is because in the economy there's a dualism. And what is the nature of that dualism? I made a small calculation that suppose you gave to every Indian 5 fundamental economic rights in addition to the political rights. Okay, we have a set of political rights in the Constitution, but suppose you gave in addition to every person, every citizen, a set of fundamental economic rights. And I take 5 rights. One is the right to food, the right to employment at a decent wage, depending on your level of skills, the right to free, publicly funded healthcare of the kind that exists in Britain or the Scandinavian countries through a national health service, the right to free, publicly funded education for everybody, at least up to the secondary level, and of course the right to old age pensions and disability benefits. You just take these 5 fundamental rights. Publicly funded education, free. You take these 5 fundamental rights. All these rights can actually be met. The expenditure for providing these rights can be met by just the following provision. You take the population, the top 1% of the population, just the top 1% of the population has an enormous amount of wealth, which is estimated at, let's say, 330 lakh crores. You put a 2% wealth tax on the wealth of the top 1% of the population. And what is more, the moment you do this, then you would find that, of course, they would divide up that wealth among all kinds of their progeny, children, and so on and so forth. Therefore, any such wealth tax must be accompanied by an inheritance tax. So you put a 2% wealth tax on the top 1% of the population, and you put 1/3 inheritance tax on every bit that is left to the progeny. Just take away 1/3 of it. Mind you, the inheritance tax is very high. In Japan, for instance, I'm told is as much as 80%. That if you leave your wealth, 80% is taken away by the state. In Britain and so on, it's at least half all over Europe. But you just take 1/3. These two taxes, just these two taxes, the 2% wealth tax on the top 1% of the population and a 1/3 inheritance tax, again on the top 1% of the population, would be sufficient to provide a percentage of GDP in the form of revenue that is adequate for making India a welfare state, in the sense of these 5 fundamental economic rights can then be guaranteed to every citizen. Now, you see, the point is that it is by no means difficult to make this country into a welfare state. We talk so much about GDP growth rate and this and that, but on the other hand, at the same time, when GDP has increased, you find on the other side, there is an increase in poverty, there's an increase in malnutrition, there's an increase in hunger, which is absolutely documented. Now, that being the case, there is this duality already existing in the country. If you want to bridge this duality, then we have to impose some taxes in order to provide a set of rights for everybody that would automatically benefit the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, and of course everybody else. Therefore, making India into a welfare state is not difficult. The purpose of education should be actually telling students what can be done to making India a welfare state, making them dissatisfied with the society we have, the society with caste oppression, with communal oppression, and so on, and how to overcome it, putting in them the urge to build a better India. Instead of that, what we are actually talking about is the opposite of producing conformity, which is why I believe this education system is a huge leap backwards. It is not a leap forward, it's a huge leap backwards. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Will there be a question and answer session, please?
Thank you, Emeritus Professor, for the
Will there be a
great
question?
session. We will take some time for
Is there any
questions now.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I have a question, sir.
Yes, please. Ask.
Yeah, sir, it was an excellent presentation as usual. I'm extremely thankful to your the other dynamics of this NEP. Sir, France was also multicultural, multilingual once upon a time. I mean, some years ago, some 100 years ago. Even now, I suppose, not in strict sense. But why do you think it is not even possible to experiment what Francois I implemented in France? The one unique education system. Why do you think?
Hello, yes. I can't hear you.
Sir, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Sir,
Okay.
why do you think? Yeah.
Okay. The point is not that we do not have ideas of how to improve the education system. The point is that in our society, no effort is being made to improve the education system. On the other hand, look, okay, let me give you an example that everybody is familiar with. I was sitting in a UGC committee some years ago. People were coming to various economics department. I'm an economist, so I was sitting in that committee. Economics department from all over India, they were coming to want kind of research fellowships. So I said, someone was saying, please give us 2 research fellowships, please give us 1 research fellowship. So we kept asking them. One very well-known university, it turns out, had a faculty of 3 people to teach MA, MPhil, and to supervise PhD. Faculty of 3 people. It's a well-known fact that in every university, a well-known university like Calcutta University, more than half of the teaching is done by ad hoc faculty, and they get a pittance, which is against the constitutional requirement of equal pay for equal work. Therefore, the point is not that we don't know, but the point is that we do know, but nothing happens. My criticism of the education policy is that behind all kinds of nice sounding phrases, they are actually making this an official policy, namely that this dualism is being institutionalized officially. That is my criticism. In other words, this dualism has existed. We know that. The country was moving towards it. We know that. But it is now being given an official institutional sanction. That is basically what I'm critical of. You're talking about France, everywhere in the world. In fact, Piketty, who's a French economist, came to JNU. And he has made calculations about inequality in India and so on. Everybody gets extremely surprised when they hear that in India there is no wealth tax. I mean, every capitalist country has a wealth tax. People become very surprised when they hear that India has no wealth tax. And you know how phenomenally the wealth inequality has improved over the last.
Sir, I have
Professor?
from Kerala.
Hello?
Yeah, please. Yes.
Yes. Professor Patnaik?
Yes.
I have a question, comrade.
Yes.
Dr. Raghu.
Yes.
Hello. Dr. Raghu, one question. The new education policy, the National Education Policy 2020 has been declared without consultation in the Parliament. Right. Another thing is, without much this stand against the World Bank and World Trade Organization, which is dealing with the school education and higher education department, how the government would come out? One question. Second question is, the Right to Education Act 2009 ought to be amended now because it has included 3 to 6 years of age and 14 to 18 years. So, under these present circumstances, what would be the fate of this Right to Information Act, Professor?
Yes. First question that you asked. I did not go into the way the education policy has come about. Firstly, education is in the concurrent list in the Constitution. Therefore, education is something for which it is not only the center, but the state government which are also responsible. No state government was consulted in framing this education policy. So the central government has prepared this education policy and given it to the states that, look, basically, this is going to be the education policy of the country, which is constitutionally wrong because it is not a sole central responsibility. Secondly, as you said, Parliament was not, Parliament did not discuss it. The whole thing is happening in a situation where Parliament cannot even meet, does not even meet. It's happening in a situation where everybody is so concerned with the COVID-19 and coronavirus crisis that nobody has really time for this. So it's as if the government is in a hurried manner pushing this through. I'll go further. there are 5 different documents which have been circulating as the new education policy. What was given out on the day that it was approved by the cabinet to the journalists was quite different. What was finally put up on the website was quite different. What was put up on the website 2 days after the original was put up on the website was quite different, and so on. Therefore, it is not even, that everything is being rushed, everything is being done in a haphazard manner, and the idea is to, and therefore Parliament doesn't get a chance to discuss it, state governments don't get a chance to discuss it, but on the other hand, this is really given as a fait accompli. So the mode of its coming into being is something which is fundamentally wrong. That is not the way that it should actually have come. Your second question is about World Bank and so on. You see, all these World Bank and so on have been associated, as you know, with school education for quite some time. The DPEP is something which was really a World Bank project. Now, why we should have World Bank association with DPEP itself is something which in this country we have had excellent school teachers. We have had people associated with school education for a very long time. We don't really need foreigners to come and tell us how our school education system should be run. And therefore, the World Bank has had a finger in this pie, and that it has had for quite some time. But just because they give some money is no reason why we should involve them in it. But on the other hand, that is something which is going to be carried further by this new education policy. In fact, many people have argued that many of its provisions are provisions which the World Bank has been demanding for some time.
Okay, sir. I have
Hello,
two
sir.
questions. Sir,
Sir, can I ask one question?
I am in the queue.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
I'm Abin.
Scrapping of the MPhil program. Actually, that will affect the employment of thousands of educated citizens, particularly the researchers in India. So, is it a way of withdrawing education by the state and leaving to the market? That is one question. Another aspect is that still before 60 years back, in the Kothari Commission also reported 60%, 6% of GDP to education. Still, we are repeating in the context of the 2020. So, what is the rhythm of this magic figure of this 6%? So, please.
Okay. Firstly, there are many things about the organization of higher education which are very, very strange. One is this 4-year undergraduate program which they are suggesting. Okay. Now, you may know that Delhi University had introduced a 4-year undergraduate program earlier. When there was huge agitation against it, and when the Narendra Modi government came to power in 2014, and Smriti Irani was the education minister, they scrapped the 4-year undergraduate program. Now, something which this government itself has scrapped for Delhi University, now you have the education policy of this government recommending for the entire country. Now, this is a very strange situation because, after all, the 4-year undergraduate policy program is something that everybody criticized because of the fact that, look, I mean, it made demands on the faculty, it made demands on the students which they could not possibly meet. Likewise, the scrapping of MPhil. Now, the point is that the MPhil was you see, PhD is very difficult to complete. Okay. If because PhD would require 3.5 to 4 years and so on, and it's not very easy for everybody. I'll tell you a story about my own life. I did my PhD in Oxford University, and I was teaching in Cambridge University. When I was teaching in Cambridge, somebody did a study. Last 10 years, how many PhD students we have had? And they found that last 10 years, they had 10 PhD students in economics, of whom 8 were Indians. because Indian students go with a scholarship, with a fellowship, they go with motivation, they stay there for 3-4 years, complete the thesis, come back home. But the English students did not finish their PhD because who's going to hang around for 4 years? They would do it for a year, 2 years, and then abandon. Exactly the same is going to happen. You see, MPhil provided you with some kind of a transitional degree. That okay, you can do for 2 years an MPhil, get a degree, and then you can teach, and you can try for a PhD later on. But now, if you force everybody who wants to get a research degree to do a 4-year PhD, because PhD normally take about 4 years. So if you force them, most of them would either drop out halfway, or alternatively, you'll have to so reduce the quality of the PhD that the PhD would basically lose all its meaning. So that's a way of actually discouraging research rather than encouraging research. And that is why I'm completely opposed to this idea of dropping the MPhil and forcing anybody who wants to do research to go and do a PhD, which is a very difficult degree.
Hello, Professor.
Yes, please.
Hello, Professor. Good evening, Professor. I'm a student of economics, postgraduate from Chennai. First of all, it's almost a dream come true that I'm even talking to you, sir. So I have just two questions, sir, which has been gnawing my mind for some years now, and this NEP hasn't. Sir, do you think standardized testing methods for any level at least should be done away with in India? Because Todd Rose has spoken in length in his book about how standardized testing is actually a bad method to recruit or even select students. One, doctor. Second question is that Ratun Roy kept on saying how our output composition doesn't have affordable education, higher education, as a result of which only the top 150 million are getting access to supposedly high quality MA degrees in foreign countries, and that's an import leakage. So what solution can the NEP cannot do anything more now, but what solution do you think can be done for these two, sir? That's it. Thank you.
First question, the standardized testing, again, it is a capitalist requirement, because if you have a labor market, in that case, you would naturally like for somebody to be, kind of same exam everywhere. In JNU, for instance, there was no standardized testing. It was internal assessment, and internal assessment worked beautifully. Okay, so the point is that the standardized testing, again, insistence upon standardized testing is again a feature. It marks the transition from an education which is supposed to be required for nation building to an education that is supposed to prepare people for the labor market under capitalism. That's basically the theme of my talk. I'm trying to say that this entire education policy is shifting from the nation building objective to the objective of producing people for the labor market of the capitalism. And standardized testing is one very important hallmark of this kind of, labor market of capitalism. And as a matter of fact, by the way, if you look at this, just imagine this whole idea that, how should our universities figure in the top so-and-so prepared by the Times Higher Education Supplement? Why are we worried about it? As I said, if we teach our students about Dadabhai Nauroji, about Rabindranath Tagore, about Gandhi, which is not taught in Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford, in that case, they would not figure in the top 200. But on the other hand, that's important for us. For Indian students, it's very important to do that. Therefore, if we are going to build an education system catering to the building of a modern India, then we should not be worrying about all these position, top 200 and so on. The fact that we worry, why do we worry? We worry because that is again a requirement of globalized capitalism. Because just as you have credit rating agencies saying that India is getting 2 A's or two Bs. Likewise, you have Times Higher Education Supplement telling you, well, JNU Economics Department, yes, it is something which is in the top 200. So these are requirements of the capitalist market. Then multinational corporations can really employ you confidently, saying that, okay, you belong to the top 200. Your such and such department belongs to top 200. Therefore, these are capitalist requirements. These are requirements of producing people for the labor market. But that's not the education system that we should be having in India. Okay, now your second question is about import. Yeah, leakage. Frankly, if somebody wants to go abroad to do an MA and so on, no problem, provided he comes back. Okay, I think more important than leakage in that sense is the brain drain. Large numbers of our engineers, large numbers of our doctors, large numbers of our trained personnel, they all go abroad and settle down there. In fact, New Jersey is full of Indians who are all kind of people who have gone from here, settling down there. Now, that's actually not just a brain drain, that's actually a resource drain, because there's a substantial amount of money that is spent by the Indian taxpayer on their education. Education everywhere, whether it's IITs or All India Institute and so on, is subsidized by the government, and that subsidy comes out of tax revenue. And therefore, people who have studied on a subsidized education scheme then go abroad and settle down. Their services are being made freely available to the American public. That is a real drain of resources, comparable to the drain of the colonial period. Now, therefore, really, and on the other hand, to the extent that people want to go and settle there, they get more money. Now, you cannot therefore have Indian salaries which are comparable to the American salaries. That's just not possible, because that would then mean enormous inequalities domestically. So your education system should be one that actually already inculcates in people, in the students, the value of serving the country, the value of being with the people of this country, and so on. And additionally, you have to have all kinds of administrative measures. For instance, anybody who goes abroad should be asked to pay a certain amount back to India in order to refund, as it were, the subsidy that has been spent on his or her education, etc. So that is a big issue. Now, you said what can be done about it. Now, what can be done about it, of course, is to raise the quality of our education system. And one way of doing that is, among other things, to make sure that there are good teachers, and for that to make sure that they are not ad hoc people getting 100 rupees per lecture or some such thing, getting a pittance compared to what they should be getting. And therefore, you have to fill up posts. You have to fill up posts with committed teachers, and those committed teachers themselves must be informed with values, which then they can pass on to the students. And the whole thing then is run as a proper education system and not just as a business. In India now, in lots of places, it is run as a business. But on the other hand, just imagine places. I mean, okay, I know of my university, JNU, before it has recently been damaged by this government. JNU, for instance, provided students with very sensitive, very kind of, an excellent education where they were not more into money making, but they actually thought about things. I mean, it was a place where people thought. Universities must be places where people think, not about money, but about all kinds of other things. Yes, please.
So can I ask one more question?
Yes, Professor.
Good evening. So my question is regarding tenure tracking system. So please.
One at a time.
My question is regarding. Thank you. So.
Yes.
Sir, my concern is that the tenure tracking system could end all permanent job in educational sector. That's a concern. And how will you react to that? The chance of ending all permanent jobs and very big job sector for coming youth. Question number two is regarding 360-degree evaluation. 360-degree evaluation could end up a rat race between professors or assistant professors or educationalists to get high marks from the students, and they may favor students, may be unethical. That's what I think. So I need a reaction from you, sir. Thank you. So myself, Abin, I'm from Kerala. Thank you, sir.
Yes. This tenure track, I mean, let's just look at it concretely. This tenure track in India would mean, and by the way, this new education policy is providing for autonomy when it comes to a large numbers of colleges, and autonomy would also mean that the governing bodies of these colleges would be relatively autonomous. They may have government nominees, they'll be relatively autonomous. If you have tenure track, then tenure track would mean that before you get tenured, they're going to say, what is your political view? Are you a kind of, are you a non-conformist? Have you written some article in some newspaper which is critical of the government? All these ways would then become ways of controlling you, ways of making you a conformist. And that is bad for the education system. And therefore, this tenure track and so on, which appears to be imitating the Americans, as a matter of fact, is really quite dangerous. Exactly the same can be said, exactly the same can be said when it comes to student evaluation. Okay, that I was teaching for a year in the US, and the student evaluation appears very good. Okay, here are students telling you and so on. Now, if the student evaluation simply takes the form of students writing how better you could lecture, sir, the following topic was not properly covered, or that the following thing is something which got left behind, and so on. So if these are ways of improving, your teaching, improving your presentation and so on, I can understand. These are suggestions. But the moment student evaluation then becomes a way to decide on whether you should actually be getting, if you're a tenure track professor, you should get tenure or not. In that case, the tenure track professor would be trying to curry favor with students by giving more marks and so on. These apparently democratic ways of something which appears democratic actually then actually subverts the objective of the situation of the entire system. Therefore, I'm against the idea of student evaluation where the students give you a grade and that grade goes to decide whether you get a promotion or not, whether you get a salary rise or not. Student suggestions about how you can improve your teaching, how you can improve your presentation, very good. I'll be in favor of that. But not student evaluation in terms of giving you a grade or a number that then enters into your career advancement.
Thank you, Professor. I think we should. Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you,
Please.
Professor.
Yes.
It is, in fact, thank you, Professor. It is indeed a very interesting and highly informative lecture. The Constitution
one question
of India. Six. I have a question.
Okay. Yes, please. There are two. Yeah.
Can I ask?
Please.
Okay, two. So,
please.
Yeah. Mr. Ajit Khanna, you can put your question.
Okay.
Mine will be the last.
Okay. Thanks. Recently, in fact, yesterday or day before yesterday, I learned that there's going to be one nation, one exam system for staff selection commission, banking exams and railway exams. These are the three major recruitment agencies where crores and crores of people are they apply for the exams, and very few lakh or 1,000 people are going to be appointed. So this one language, one culture, one nation, one India. Where are we heading to? And you are talking about this NEP itself is against constitutional rights, fundamental rights, and other rights, students' rights, and government doesn't seem to lend a patient hearing to what we are discussing. What is happening to this country, sir?
Yes. But okay, this one nation and so on again is a completely wrong notion. It's again a notion which is in conformity with capitalism, but it's not in conformity with nation building. That's exactly what I'm saying. You know, let us say when C.V. Raman got appointed in Calcutta University, he did not sit through any net or any test or anything. The Vice Chancellor just invited him. He hadn't yet got his Nobel Prize. The Vice Chancellor just got him, wrote to him saying, come and join. When Amartya Sen got appointed in Yadavpur University, the Vice Chancellor Triguna Sen, who later became a minister in the cabinet of the center, simply invited him to come and join. Now, so this whole business about what now it may appear, I agree that the problem with that system, where C.V. Raman got invited or Amartya Sen got invited, is that then there will be exclusion. A Dalit boy would not get invited. An OBC boy would not get invited. That's why I would be in favor of reservations. Make sure that there is proper reservation in jobs and so on, so that no one is excluded. But on the other hand, there has to be a kind of, I mean, a particular university must have the freedom to decide whom it takes, whom it does not take. There must be room for seeing whether a person is good or not, quite apart from how a person did in some exam or the other. And by the way, every time we have gone in for these exams and so on, then you have coaching classes for them. Then you actually find that instead of doing research, the person wanting to join a faculty then goes and attends coaching classes. It devalues education, completely devalues education. Therefore, these apparently democratic ways of recruiting actually turn out to be a devaluation of the education system. You have a no? Yeah, I think that's yes, please.
Sir, I have the last question.
Please, please.
Yeah, this is the last question, Professor. So I really thank you, Professor. Indeed, it is a very, very interesting and highly informative lecture. I have two questions, Professor. One is, the constitutional law is supreme in our country. The Constitution seeks to ensure social justice to all its citizens of this country. But the document, that is National Education Policy 2020, I think does not have any scope for providing social justice. So how the social justice is going to be ensured to the citizens of this country? This is one. The document speaks a lot about the Indianization education. What do you mean? What does it mean? Indianization of education. So what is that they are trying to offer to the current Indian students?
Okay, let me begin with the second question first.
Thank you,
You see,
Professor.
on the one hand, we are actually talking about world-class universities. We are talking about getting foreign universities to set up campuses here. In other words, on the one hand, we are actually talking about that foreign universities are going to come into our country. Okay, therefore making our education system on a par with British or American or whatever. Okay. On the other hand, we talk about Indianization. Now, basically, it seems to me that we want to take over the syllabus from America or from Britain and so on. We want them to run our education system, but add to it a bit of Dronacharya or a bit of Bhishma or a bit of Mahabharata and so on, which is a frill, if you like, a kind of, in other words, there will be a kind of frill of Indianness, add a bit about kind of, Takshashila or Nalanda and so on, so that everybody feels, as I said, again, pride in being Indian, so that, the frills, the extra, the tidbits would be about India, but the core would basically be taking over syllabi from foreign universities and getting, and there was even talk of getting them to come here and teach us. Okay, this idea has been there for some time, but this, there has been particular emphasis on this. As a matter of fact, many years ago, there was a suggestion that we should actually get Harvard University to come and adopt one of our universities. We should get Oxford University to come and adopt one of our universities. We should get Cambridge to adopt one of our universities. What does adopt mean? That basically we can't govern ourselves, we can't produce a university ourselves, but we must get them to come and run universities for us. But on the other hand, we are perfectly happy if in it you can throw a little bit of kind of nishkama karma or a little bit of this and that, which then gives a frill of Indianness. Therefore, this Indianness is really a completely bogus idea. It actually camouflages an attempt to homogenize the education system in a way that, as I said, our products of the education system would then enter the labor market and appear before multinational corporations for job interviews. Your other question was about social justice. Yes, social justice is really given the go-by in this. Really, it is ignored in this. They talk about economically and socially disadvantaged groups. If you are saying, how would, for instance, a Dalit boy manage to get education if education is very expensive, if there are no reservations? As a matter of fact, they talk about scholarships. Okay, if you just imagine, if you talk about scholarships, if the colleges are not now going to be autonomous with financial autonomy, if a college is going to give a scholarship to a Dalit boy out of its own resources, then the fees for the non-Dalit students would have to be correspondingly higher. Therefore, the non-Dalit students would be saying to the Dalit students, just imagine the social setting. The non-Dalit students would be telling the Dalit students that, look, you are studying here because I pay for you. It would actually destroy collegiality. The way scholarships should be given is for the government to tax and have scholarships tax financed, not financed through students' fees. Not that A is doing a favor to B, but as a matter of fact, B is getting an education as a matter of right, which the state is providing, and the state is providing through its tax revenue. Then it becomes impersonal. Then it becomes a right on the part of one person to get that education. So the moment you say scholarships, it destroys collegiality. It will actually destroy the self-confidence of the Dalit boy, who would then quit after 1 year and get that piece of certificate that the new education policy promises. Therefore, social justice is being given the go-by. And that is one of the most unfortunate things. But on the other hand, that is something that is not clearly stated, and that's why many people have missed the significance of this.
Thank you, Prabhat. Dr. Silakumar, I think we should wind up.
I hope almost all your questions are answered.
Hello.
And it is the time wrap up. I welcome our Dean Academic, PhD Vidya, to deliver vote of thanks.
Pleasant good evening, one and all present here. On behalf of Periyar Maniammai Institute of Science and Technology, we prefer to thank our today's sir. Really, it's a very informative session. On behalf of our esteemed Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor and Pro Vice Chancellor and faculty members, we sincerely thank you for the wonderful and nice informative session on new educational policy. It really gives us in a different way of the new educational policy, sir. We thank you so much. And on behalf of the organizing team, we thank Dr. Raghu, former professor and head in the Government Arts and Science College, Salem, who supported us for organizing this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much, sir. I thank the participants from various disciplines all over the country participated in this webinar. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us a support. Form will be sent to your email ID. Thank you, one and all. Have a nice day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all.
Okay. Thank you.